Next up, we have Kobie Turner, the defensive tackle out of Wake Forest, who's just a fun guy to watch and get some film on. He's not a prospect that I knew very much about coming in, and I'll be honest, when I was doing my first cut of D-line grades, I set him up in a bad spot. I put him between Jalen Carter and Siaki Ika, who are obviously both rather highly regarded in their own right, but I think Kobie surprised me a little bit. A lot of times I like to sort of do that volley back and forth of, maybe a more known prospect and someone you've heard of, and then bounce it back with someone that you haven't heard of. And in that regard, Kobie lived up to that and more, as he impressed me, no question. As far as, some of the traits and intangibles and whatnot, I think there's both positives and negatives here. First and foremost, I'd be remiss not to mention the age. He is an older prospect. That said, I'm recording this on the 26th of April. I have to say happy birthday to Kobie Turner, right? Just turned 24 years old. And is it a concern? Slightly, but is it something that would take him off my board? Not by any means, right? He's someone who played 4 years at Richmond and then transferred up to Wake Forest as a grad transfer, if I'm not mistaken. In that regard, there's no problem there, right? Especially for a guy who's just trying to continue his football career. Good on you. Some of these other guys who just keep hanging around college and hoping to, keep dominating guys as they get older and more developed in the weight room. Some of those guys are maybe ones where I have some questions. I'm looking at you, Will McDonald. But no, I think in Kobie's case, hey, he started at Richmond and he had to grind his way up, and maybe it took a little bit longer to get there, but he got there, and when he was there at Wake Forest, he produced dang well, right? We didn't even really touch on some of the measurables there, but very impressive physically, despite a slightly smaller frame. As far as the stats are concerned, here's his Wake Forest numbers. He was coming off the bench for the Demon Deacons quite a bit there, and he was earning a solid share of snaps overall. But I just wanted to note that it was sort of a Lucas Van Ness situation where, even though he might be the most talented guy in the room, it wasn't necessarily that he was always the first one onto the field, if that makes any sense at all. So just something to note as far as maybe why these numbers aren't what you'd expect, but at the same time, 2 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles, 2 pass deflections, kind of making an impact across the board. So even though, these aren't top tier first round numbers necessarily, I don't think they're anything to scoff at either by any means. And neither are his Richmond numbers. I figured we'd put that up here as well, considering he did play 4 seasons there. And sometimes when you look at these numbers, they're just absurd, right? You'll have guys, 17 sacks. And it's like, well, I don't think that'll translate. Well, Kobie had very solid numbers, and we've already seen it translate, 7 sacks in 12 games as a sophomore, 3.5 in 4 games as a, in that COVID-shortened season, multiple forced fumbles and sacks there that senior season, and then he moves up and produces well at Wake Forest. So, solid career there at both schools. And as far as the grade, we'll get into that now prior to some film, because this isn't going to be a Q-rated video. There's just not enough Wake Forest All-22 available to do that. So, we'll just briefly touch on the grade and then put on a game in the background against Boston College. So, as far as the grade, 71.25 raw, multiply that by the defensive tackle position premium, comes out to a 74.10, and really a middle of the third round guy. Someone who I like quite a bit. I was impressed with quite a bit. I think there's certainly some negatives, and you could say, I'm talking about on the field negatives, and then you could say there's some extraneous factors that are concerns as well, which is why I added that little red flag there. Because even though I have him graded in the third round, I don't know that that's necessarily where I would feel most comfortable taking him, just due to, again, 1, the age, 2, the experience at, a Power 5 level. I think he's more likely to go later than the third round, but I think for those teams who get him later, as long as you're willing to kind of work with those constraints, he could be an incredibly solid value and valuable piece, I should say. Can't talk today for some reason, but but he could be a very valuable piece to add to your defensive tackle rotation. I'm not necessarily projecting him to be some, all-pro starter, but I think, hey, if you just want someone who can eat up some reps and be rather productive with them in a rotational role, I think you're looking right at Kobie Turner. So as far as what makes up the grade, what do I think he does well? What do I think he potentially struggles at? I'll just go right off my notes off the bat here. I said, it was interesting because he's an older prospect coming off the bench for the Demon Deacons. That said, through those first 3 games that I evaluated on, he was incredibly productive as far as generating pressure on the QB, but also as a run defender, which was a pleasant surprise given his size at 6'3", 290. He was sneaky effective as far as an ability to find his way out of some pretty thick double teams, which I'm hoping we see here in this film today, and just reeling down blocks and found himself involved in quite a few more plays than you'd expect out of somebody in a somewhat limited snap capacity. That's what I wrote about 5 months ago, and I think to this day, after having watched a little bit more film on him, I think it continued, right? It was consistent. Played with some really good leverage, which helped against the run, but also has some really active hands, and for me, the highest motor of anybody that I graded on the year, both on the interior and exterior as far as DNs and edge rushers are concerned. I was somewhat surprised at the time that he wasn't earning more snaps just because of how hard of a worker he was, but it is what it is. You get it in his first year at a school. It's tough to just surpass and leapfrog guys on the depth chart that have put in that time at that school when you're just kind of hopping in for 1 year and trying to help them out. As far as the grades themselves, how did they break down? Well, I gave him a little bit of I don't want to say a below average grade, but I gave him a 13 out of 20 as far as his ability to anchor and the strength at the point of attack. It felt like at times you saw the size shine through, and as far as an ability to get moved off the spot, and whether it was horizontal or vertical displacement, you could see it from time to time. That said, as I kind of mentioned, he was a sneaky guy against those double teams, right? He was dropping to a knee a lot of the times. He was pulling jerseys. He was just feisty. You kind of see it there. Just has good leverage, getting up underneath guys, and could be tough to move even for 2 people at times. So even though at times I thought he could get washed out of plays one-on-one, especially when O-lineman had an angle, there were other times where I thought he made an impact against 2 guys, which was rather impressive. As far as some other grades, I thought he graded out very well as far as just his general pass rush ability, which for me primarily comes down to your hand usage. As I mentioned, he was very active. You can see it a little bit there, although that was a bad block by that right guard. And he has an explosive first step. I gave him a 12.75 out of 15 there. Is a guy that I wish would have ran the 40, but I think you saw it in some of the shuttles and things of that nature. I don't want to say necessarily the twitchiest athlete of the world, but he has some juice, and when you combine that with the motor, it makes for a special combination on the inside. No questions asked. Otherwise, I said combined with the motor. The motor's the next grade on my sheet here, and I give him a 9.5 out of 10. He might still be chasing quarterbacks, and the season's been done for 4 months now, right? Just an absolute relentless guy in that regard. It felt like even on those plays where he was maybe a little bit out of position, and guys were able to get a good angle on him, let's say, it felt like he was doing whatever he could to fight back. And that's more than you can say about a lot of his peers. And in that regard, that is one of the major reasons why I do have him sort of in that 3rd round range. There's, kind of what I was referring to before as far as the anchor and strength at the point of attack. This run obviously goes the other way, and he does get tripped up there. So you can't penalize him too bad, but he's a guy who will end up on the ground every now and then, right? Again, 293 pounds. He's going up against guys on the interior who might be 330. So there's a strength and size disadvantage that he's at there. But I thought by and large he made the most of his opportunities when he had them. As far as some other areas briefly, finishing and tackling, I thought he was generally solid, but at times you could see the size, right? Just wasn't, with some of these other guys, say Jalen Carter, right, who's 300 pounds, but has the strength that, plays like he's 320. He's just ragdolling guys and bringing down players at a, pretty radical rate. It felt like Kobie not quite there. It felt like he was maybe more liable to bounce off of some running backs, and, I don't want to say an inability to pull down QBs, because again, he was just working so hard that, a lot of those opportunities did come to fruition. But yeah, at times I thought the finishing and tackling have cleaned up a little bit. I thought the block recognition was also something that I noted as maybe being a little bit on the more average side, I'll say. But for him, he's such a quick guy that a lot of times it's just head down, let me get off the ball, and then react later. So those, that block rec grade is kind of naturally lower for those types of players. And Kobie didn't break that mold necessarily, right? Because so many plays he is just trying to get upfield, and sometimes that could cost him. Sometimes he can get too far upfield, they'll bang a run in back behind him. And yeah, I mean, there's just some questions in that regard. Leverage, again, I as I mentioned in that quick little read there, I gave him a very good grade, 4 out of 5. A lot of times you see it here. I mean, they're lining him up as a pure nose, which is, I would say, radically out of position, but he's able to hold his own and at times make plays from that alignment. So he's a guy that I think best profiles as a rotational 3 technique, but if it's a dime package or a nickel package and you want to move him even more inside than that, he does have some experience on the interior as well, as you see there, just more and more nose reps. But I just don't really expect that's where he'll be used. And I think that maybe that was part of the reason, as far as both sides of the coin are concerned, the anchor and strength at point of attack. I think those reps on the interior have maybe hardened him and made him more effective at times. But at the same time, I think those reps also maybe sometimes accentuate the weaknesses, if that makes any sense. So you're hoping, in my opinion, that you can take him from a 0 technique or a 1 technique, and you can take some of those positive reps that you saw and just get them more consistently on the edge, whereas maybe on the inside in the A gaps, there was more of a hit or miss nature to it. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. Sort of a miscast situation there, and then you're hoping that he can take the positives that he gained and garnered while he was miscast and apply them outwards, where maybe those weaknesses could potentially become strengths, right? But yeah, I thought overall a rather solid prospect, and somebody that if I was able to get on my roster in sort of that, I say 3rd round, but even if it's later than that, and I expect it to be later than that, if I can get him in that early day 3 range, potentially to a mid day 3 pick, I would certainly feel good as a front office and as a general manager in that regard, right? Just adding someone who can have quality reps, and even if they're not always the most impactful, he's working hard, and hopefully, I was gonna say hopefully that continues at the next level. That will obviously continue at the next level, but hopefully it leads to similar results that it did here at the college level, because you'll see he's just very often getting offensive linemen in precarious situations. He's got those active hands. He's throwing them. He's bending. He's trying to do everything he can. That's a very impressive play right there. As far as beating that initial down block, it looked like on the outside zone. Let's see it better here. Yeah, I mean, that's just a wrecking ball right there, right? No, in all seriousness, I mean, you beat the down block, then you got a puller, you discard him, get him out of the way, and then you finish and bring down the back on the play. That type of stuff is very impressive, and there are some of the flashes that I think have him in that 3rd round range for me, because it wasn't even just flashes. It was on a more consistent basis than some of the other DTs that I think are being more highly regarded than him. I'll say it right now, just as far as a raw grade is concerned, I have him graded higher than Siaki Ika. I have him graded higher than Mozzie Smith. I have him graded higher than Jacqueline Roy, right? A lot of guys that I feel like nationally are regarded as better. I just think that some of Kobie's traits shine through. I don't think those guys had the want to that he did as far as the motor's concerned. I don't think a lot of them had that juice that he did as far as the explosiveness and first step is concerned. And that's a nasty combination in itself. And when you add in the hand usage and other things he's refined over his 5-year college career, I think that there are certainly some positives to work with here. And really, with that said, it's kind of all I have on Kobie. I didn't expect to hang out with you guys and just watch the film, but we can let it run a little bit longer. We'll probably let it go till halftime here. This is like a 20-minute cut up, which I'm trying not to do. I'm trying to make these videos a little bit shorter, but it is what it is, especially for some of these guys where I imagine film is at a premium here on YouTube, and I doubt there's very many cut-ups of Kobie. I'll let it run a little bit longer. But you can find film like this on Caddy Cut-Up's Patreon. He posts videos every couple weeks or every week, and yeah, it's a very good resource if you enjoy film and evaluating prospects like I do, right? It just gives you a little bit better of a perspective. Sometimes it's a little bit frustrating, because you want a certain game to come out. You've seen a game, right? And it's like, oh, I really want to show that to the people. And then it's like, oh, no, nothing. But yeah, generally does a good job getting to at least a game or two of every prospect, and Kobie's no exception. Yeah, so that's really all I wanted to bring to you guys today. I don't know if I should just go silent and let the film play. Could just let it play to its conclusion here. Haven't really done that yet. Not really in the mood to get a copyright strike because I'm not, not reviewing it over top. So I'll just hang out with you guys. It is what it is. Nice little 3-tech rep here. What do we got? Decent timing of the snap. Gets in the chest of the O-lineman. Sometimes he can struggle there. I guess that was an area that I didn't talk about as far as the ability to gain extension on these guys and really bench press them off, right? Like he gets in a good spot right there, but you wish the hands were able to, kind of work from the chest of the O-lineman and propel that offensive lineman backwards, essentially, right? And maybe that's more of against the run as far as stacking and shedding is concerned, but that was one of the more questionable areas I felt. Just an ability to get off the blocks, and I get it because he's smaller. At the same time, I see those 31 reps on bench or whatever it was, and I don't necessarily always see that translating, right? So that was one of the areas I should say was a negative that I didn't really touch on. I gave him a 4.5 out of 10 there, which is certainly a pretty sizable divot there in his grade. I just hate these nose tackle reps, man. I really do, because it's just so out of position. It really is. If we were honestly going to have him lined up in this sort of defense, he might be better suited as one of those edge rushers. I'm not kidding with you guys either. Like he really would be, just because the first step, right? And I'm not saying he can't make an impact up the middle. You see it there, right? He deflates the pocket somewhat, even though he never cleanly beats the guy or anything, right? But you have edge rushers working the QB up, and then he's worked that center a couple yards back, and commands some decent attention and has a solid rep there. Like it's there, but at the same time, it's kind of annoying, if that makes any sense at all, because I don't think that's where he's going to play. Otherwise, what's some other stuff we could talk about? Just not even specific to this film, but just Kobie in general. I kind of mentioned his role as far as being more of a 3 technique than anything else, in my opinion. Not a guy that you're going to draft and expect to be the best D lineman on your team, and probably even a starter, especially off the bat, right? To me, he's more of a high-energy guy that you can bring in with that second line, similar to how Wake Forest was, in all fairness. When maybe those offensive linemen are a little bit more fatigued, right, on that next drive of the game, and as the game gets a little bit deeper, and then he can capitalize in that regard, and that speed and athleticism gap looks even larger, right? Because he's fresh as anything, and these guys are dead tired on the 12th play of a drive. You bring Kobie Turner, he can sneak up on you, right? So yeah, when I say 3rd round grade with a little bit of a red flag there, I don't know if I'm suggesting that he'll be a starter at any point, but I think he could be a very solid rotational guy and give you snaps similar to what he was here at Wake Forest. I just think at Wake Forest, a guy of his caliber should have been getting way more snaps, if that makes any sense at all. I almost think the Wake Forest snap count should be what he's getting in the NFL, but for a guy that's going to be in the NFL, he should have been getting way more snaps at Wake Forest. Hopefully you guys get where I'm coming from in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, there's some strength, and you see it from time to time. Putting a guy on the ground didn't really matter as far as the play itself is concerned. You see flashes of it, right? But again, I think, especially as a run defender, that's one of the more questionable areas, right? Just the getting off blocks and showing off what he did on that last pass rush rep, showing it off when he's got one guy down blocking into him. It's nice to be able to spin off these guys and counter with your athleticism, but if you can't counter with your hands and win with your technique, then it feels like there's somewhat of a ceiling on your game. And there most certainly is with Kobie, right? No question. I think the age, in a way, is a ceiling of sorts. I don't expect the same level of improvement that I do out of him compared to other guys, but I do think there is some solid stuff that he could do for your squad on the field, not only in 2023, but for years to come. We don't need to watch all those flags, but it is what it is. Lots of stalemates here against these centers. Again, like, this is kind of accentuating his weaknesses almost, right? He'd be a good gap penetrator, so what are we going to do? Line him up head up on somebody. Well, he struggles getting off blocks. What are we going to do? We're going to give the offensive lineman the easiest angles to block him on. Well, I think you guys can sort of see my frustration there. We got to block him. He's not the guy you leave unblocked on this D-line. That's for sure. He has the athleticism to to win on that front. Obviously, you want him to bring down the QB on that first tackle attempt there, but he keeps working. He does. Haven't quite seen the motor shine through as much in this game as I did some of the others. But I don't think we can really look at this and say there's been many negative motor plays either, if that makes any sense at all. He's still very active trying to get off blocks. You just see maybe it's not always there from time to time, Well, you can't say he's not trying there as he's sort of, working inside and inside and inside. And it's like, well, sometimes just a loss, right? It is what it is. What do we got on this one? Another 3-tech 4-eye rep. Slants inside. See, a rep like that I think looks worse than it actually is. He was definitely being asked to slant into that B gap. Might have been A gap, actually. Does he cross the guard's face? That's the question. Yes, he does. And in that regard, when you're moving in the direction that they want to block you anyway, it's going to look worse than it actually is. That's not a rep where I was mentioning some at times shaky block recognition. That's not a rep where I would give it to him. To me, that's all on the defensive coordinator and the position that he's asking you to be in. I want to get a better look at this one as far as what he did there was concerned. I mean, again, it's a rep against a double team where he just kind of burrows down and somehow doesn't get moved, right? That's kind of what I was referring to in that initial bit of my notes, where it's like, man, even a play like that, there wasn't a lot of vertical movement, was there? In a way, that's a negative, right? He ends up on the ground. I get it. You don't want that. But, I mean, look at the initial stalemate there. And the linebacker gets to go free because he ate 2 guys, right? So, on one hand, yeah, there's the question marks. But on the other, there's the impact that his abilities are able to have on the overall defense. And in that regard, I think he's certainly more positive than negative. I mean, that's a good rep there, just fighting, just running. I mean, we got to see what he did with his hands on this one. Shifts out to a 4-eye, works on the guard, works on the center, and it's just never stopping those feet, right? And even though they had 3 guys on that side that could have blocked him, none of them were really able to cleanly, Very impressive. Wrapping up here, looks like Wake Forest has the lead, plus it's the 4th quarter where he might not get a ton of reps anyway. That might have actually been the last play, looking at the time left on this video. So with that said, I think that's going to do it for this one, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. Nice read there on the screen, I will say. I was talking about some block rec. That was very good. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully if your team gets Kobie Turner, you learned something today, or at the very least, if you didn't learn anything, hopefully you enjoyed some All-22 film, because like I said, it's been quite hard to come by for Turner and Wake Forest, but there was a decent little game. There was the one very nice play against the run early on where he sheds the down block, beats the puller, brings down the back, but some other solid pressures and things of that nature. So again, quality player. I think a quality rotational player, and someone that, especially in a draft where, I keep saying it in every video, but I only have 16 first-round grades. I think if you're a team that has a need at D tackle that's maybe not able to be filled at the top of the board, Kobie's a guy who can add some solid depth to your room later in the draft. And whether you get him in the third, or heck, into the 4th, 5th, 6th, or 7th, right? I think he'll be a quality player to add to your organization. So with that said, if you thought this was a quality video, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good fun YouTube stuff, and check out the channel for other potential prospects that your team might have drafted as well. So with that said, that's all I have for you guys in this one. I'm mic'd up, now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys. I'll see you next time.